"Is that your mother?" someone asked, and I smiled without hesitation and said, "No." The word came out smoother than I expected, almost automatic, like something I had practiced in my head more times than I cared to admit. I didn't look back to see if she heard it, but I felt it anyway, like a shift in the air behind me, subtle but undeniable. The ballroom lights shimmered against crystal glasses and polished marble floors, and the low hum of conversation wrapped around me like a shield. This was my world now: clean lines, tailored suits, carefully curated impressions. Everything in its place. Everything controlled. I adjusted the sleeve of my blazer and forced a small laugh as my colleagues continued talking, but my ears weren't with them anymore. They were somewhere behind me, where she stood. Margaret Collins, 68 years old. My mother. She had insisted on coming tonight, even after I told her it was just a small company event, nothing important. She showed up anyway, wearing that pale blue dress she saved for special occasions, her silver hair carefully brushed, her posture straight despite the years. And her face. That was the part one could never prepare myself for. The scar stretched along the left side, uneven, textured, impossible to ignore. It caught the light in a way that made people pause, even if they tried not to. I had seen that pause 1,000 times. The quick flicker of surprise, followed by polite avoidance. I hated that moment. Hated being in it. Hated what it did to the room. So I learned to step ahead of it, to control the narrative before anyone else could. That's what tonight was supposed to be about. Control. I had worked too hard to get here. 10 years building my reputation, climbing through rooms filled with people who measured worth in confidence and presentation. In this world, perception wasn't just important. It was everything. And she didn't fit into it. I caught a glimpse of her from the corner of my eye. She stood near the edge of the room, hands clasped gently in front of her, watching me. Not in a demanding way. Not expecting anything. Just watching. The way she always did. Like she was proud to simply be there. That look made something tighten in my chest, something I didn't want to name. So I turned away. "Emily, your presentation last quarter was incredible," someone said, and I nodded, slipping back into the version of myself that belonged here. Confident. Composed. Untouchable. I spoke easily, laughed at the right moments, made eye contact, kept everything moving. But every now and then, I felt it again. That quiet presence behind me. Not loud. Not intrusive. Just there. At one point, I saw her take a small step closer, as if she might come over, but then she stopped. Someone brushed past her, and she moved aside quickly, lowering her gaze. I noticed the way her hands tightened slightly, the way she adjusted the sleeve of her dress as if trying to make herself smaller. I told myself I was imagining it. That she was fine. She had always been fine. Strong. Independent. Never asking for more than I was willing to give. Which, if I was being honest, wasn't much. The music shifted to something softer, and conversations began to thin as people drifted toward the bar or the terrace. I finally allowed myself a deeper breath, thinking maybe the night had passed without incident. Maybe no one else would ask that question again. Maybe I could just get through this and go back to my life where everything made sense. Then I heard it. A voice, older, quieter, standing just behind me. "That woman over there," he said gently. "She looks familiar." I turned slightly, following his gaze before I could stop myself. And there she was, still standing alone, still watching, still waiting for nothing at all. I felt something stir, something uncomfortable and unfamiliar, but I pushed it down the same way I always did. Because some things were easier not to question. Some things were easier to leave exactly where they were. Unseen, unspoken, just like I had done my entire life. The drive home was quiet, the kind of quiet that does not feel peaceful but heavy, like something left unsaid lingering in the air between each passing streetlight. I kept both hands on the steering wheel, eyes fixed ahead, as if looking anywhere else might force me to think about what had happened. Or what I had said. No, not said. What I had denied. The word echoed anyway. No. I reached a red light and slowed to a stop, the glow washing over the dashboard. For a moment, everything felt still. Then, without meaning to, I glanced at the passenger seat. Empty. Of course it was empty. She had not ridden with me. She had come on her own, said she did not want to inconvenience me. She always said that. I tightened my grip slightly and looked back at the road. When I pulled into my apartment complex, the familiar sight of clean lines and perfectly trimmed hedges usually brought a sense of order, but tonight it felt distant, almost staged. I parked, sat there for a few seconds longer than necessary, then stepped out and walked inside. The hallway lights flickered softly overhead, and the echo of my heels against the floor seemed louder than usual. Inside my apartment, everything was exactly where I had left it. The couch, the glass coffee table, the framed certificates on the wall. Proof of everything I had built, everything I had become. I set my keys down and slipped off my shoes, letting the silence settle around me. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt hollow. I moved toward the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window. Composed, put together, untouched. I studied my face for a moment, the smoothness of it, the symmetry, the absence of anything that might draw a second glance. It was what people expected, what they respected, what they trusted. I told myself that was enough. It had to be enough. My phone buzzed lightly on the counter. A message. I picked it up, already knowing who it would be before I even looked. Mom. I hesitated for a second, then opened it. I got home safe. Thank you for inviting me. You looked beautiful tonight. I read it twice. Simple, gentle, no mention of anything else. No question, no hint that she had heard me. I set the phone down slowly, something tightening again in my chest, sharper this time. I walked to the living room and sat down, staring at nothing in particular. Images from the night replayed in fragments. Her standing near the wall, her hands folded, that small step forward she never completed. I exhaled slowly and leaned back, closing my eyes. This was not new. I had been doing this for years. Creating distance, managing appearances, telling myself it was necessary, that it was better this way, cleaner, easier. I opened my eyes again and reached for the remote, turning on the television just to fill the silence. But the sound felt wrong, intrusive. I muted it almost immediately. The room fell quiet again. I stood up and walked toward the hallway, passing by the mirror near the door. For a moment, I caught my reflection again. Then something else. A memory, faint but persistent. A smaller version of myself, standing beside her, holding her hand, not looking away. I blinked and it was gone. Just me again. Alone. I turned off the hallway light and headed toward my bedroom, telling myself the same thing I always did. That everything was fine. That I had made the right choices. That some things were simply easier not to think about. But as I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, sleep did not come. Only that quiet, steady presence I had left behind, still waiting somewhere I refused to look. The next morning began like every other one, precise and structured, as if nothing from the night before had followed me into the daylight. I woke up at 6:30, turned off the alarm before it could ring a second time, and moved through my routine without pause. Coffee brewed while I checked emails. The city outside my window was already alive, cars moving in steady lines, people heading somewhere important, just like me. I stood in front of my closet longer than usual, scanning through rows of neutral tones and tailored pieces, searching for something that felt right. Or maybe something that felt normal. I chose a charcoal suit, simple and sharp, the kind that made people listen when I spoke. As I dressed, my mind stayed carefully blank, avoiding any thought that might slow me down. That was how I functioned. Keep moving. Keep building. Do not look back. By the time I stepped into the office, everything had settled into place again. The familiar rhythm returned quickly. Meetings, presentations, conversations. That required focus, but no emotion. I moved through them effortlessly, nodding at the right moments, speaking with clarity and control. No one asked me about the gala. No one mentioned the woman who had stood quietly near the wall. To them, the night had been exactly what it appeared to be. Polished, successful, complete. Around midday, I found myself in the break room, pouring another cup of coffee I did not really need. A few colleagues stood nearby, talking casually about the event. I kept my attention on the coffee machine, pretending not to listen. There was this woman there, one of them said, his tone thoughtful rather than critical. Older. She had this presence. I do not know how to explain it. I froze for just a second, barely noticeable, then continued stirring my cup. You mean the one with the scar? Someone else replied quietly. There was no cruelty in the voice. Just curiosity. Yes, he said. But it was not just that. It felt like she had been through something. Something important. I felt my fingers tighten slightly around the cup. I think she was beautiful. A third voice added, softer this time. Not in the usual way. But there was something about her. Strong. The word lingered in the air longer than the others. Strong. I lowered my gaze, watching the coffee swirl slowly, as if the motion could steady something inside me. No one looked at me. No one connected the conversation to me. I was just another person in the room. That was what I wanted. That was what I had always chosen. But the words stayed with me. They did not match the narrative I had built so carefully over the years. They did not fit the version of reality I had accepted without question. I left the break room sooner than I needed to, returning to my office with a quiet urgency I could not fully explain. I closed the door behind me and sat down, staring at the screen in front of me without seeing it. Strong. I leaned back slowly, exhaling under my breath. My mind drifted, uninvited this time. Not to last night, but further back, to moments I had not revisited in years. A kitchen filled with the smell of something warm. A small hand wrapped around a much larger one. A voice, calm and steady, telling me everything would be all right even when I did not understand why it would not. I pressed my lips together and sat up straighter, pushing the images away before they could take shape. This was not useful. This was not productive. I had built my life on clarity, on decisions that made sense. There was no room for confusion. And yet, as the afternoon stretched on, I found myself distracted in ways I could not control. Numbers blurred slightly. Conversations required more effort. At one point, I opened my phone without thinking, staring at the last message she had sent me. "You looked beautiful tonight." I read it again, slower this time. Not as a passing detail, but as something intentional. Something chosen. I set the phone down, but I did not move away from it. For the first time, a question surfaced that I had never allowed myself to ask. Not about her, but about me. And I did not have an answer. I left the office later than usual that day, not because I had more work to do, but because leaving meant facing the silence again, and this time it felt different. Not empty, but unsettled. As I stepped outside, the evening air was cooler, carrying that faint city hum that usually helped me reset. I walked past rows of parked cars, my heels tapping against the pavement in a steady rhythm, but my thoughts refused to follow that same order. They kept circling back to something I could not fully place. Not a memory. Not yet. Just a feeling that something I believed for years might not be as simple as I had made it. When I got into my car, I did not start the engine right away. Instead, I sat there, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The same face I had studied countless times. The same face that had opened doors, earned respect, built a life. I tilted my head slightly, examining it as if I were seeing it for the first time. Then, without meaning to, another image slipped in. Not clear, just a fragment. A smaller space, warmer light, a voice calling my name from somewhere close. I blinked and the image disappeared, leaving only the quiet interior of the car. I let out a slow breath and finally turned the key. The drive home felt longer than usual, even though the streets were familiar. When I reached my apartment, I did not go inside immediately. Instead, I checked my phone again, almost out of habit. No new messages. The last one was still there, unchanged. I got home safe. I read it again, this time focusing on the simplicity of it. Not what was said, but what was not. No question about the night. No mention of the moment I wished I could erase. Just reassurance. Just kindness. I slipped the phone back into my bag and went inside. The apartment felt colder than it had the night before, even though nothing had changed. I moved through it slowly, turning on lights one by one, as if brightness might fill whatever had started to open inside me. In the living room, I stopped in front of a small cabinet I rarely used. It held things I did not often look at. Old photographs, a few keepsakes, fragments of a past I had carefully placed out of reach. I hesitated for a moment, my hand resting on the handle, then pulled it open. The faint scent of paper and time drifted up as I sorted through the contents. There were photos of birthdays, holidays, moments that seemed ordinary at first glance. I flipped through them quickly, not really searching for anything specific. Then one image made me stop. It was small, slightly faded at the edges. I held it closer. A child stood in the center, no more than 3 years old, smiling at something outside the frame. Beside her stood a woman, younger, her face turned slightly away from the camera. I stared at the picture longer than I expected to, noticing details I had never paid attention to before. The way the woman's hand rested gently on the child's shoulder. The way her posture leaned just slightly inward, protective without being obvious. I swallowed slowly, something tightening in my chest again. I did not remember this moment. Or maybe I had chosen not to. I set the photo down carefully on the table and stepped back, as if distance might make it easier to ignore. But it did not. The image stayed with me, clearer now, sharper. Not just a picture, but a question. And for the first time, I realized that I did not know the full story of the person I had spent my life keeping at a distance. And that thought, more than anything else, unsettled me. I did not sleep much that night, not because I was restless in the usual way, but because something inside me had shifted, quietly but completely, like a door I did not know existed had been left slightly open. The photograph stayed on the table where I had placed it, and even from across the room, I could feel its presence, as if it was waiting for me to look again. I tried to ignore it. I went through my routine, made coffee, checked my emails, even turned on the television just to create noise, but nothing settled the feeling that had taken root. By mid-morning, I found myself back in front of the cabinet, opening it again without hesitation this time. If there was more, I needed to see it. I began sorting through the stack more carefully, slower now, paying attention to details I had once dismissed as unimportant. There were more photos of the same time period. Me as a child, always close to her, always within reach of her hand, her presence, her attention. I noticed how often she was looking at me instead of the camera, how her expression softened in a way I could not remember ever noticing. Then I found something different. Not a photograph. A small envelope, slightly worn at the edges. My name was written on the front in handwriting I recognized immediately. Margaret's handwriting. I hesitated before opening it, my fingers resting lightly against the paper as if it might disappear if I moved too quickly. Then I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out the single folded sheet inside. The paper was old, the ink slightly faded, but still clear. I unfolded it slowly and began to read. Emily, if you are reading this, it means you have started asking questions I never wanted you to carry. I stopped for a moment, my breath catching slightly, then continued. There are things in life that do not need to be remembered in order to be felt. I always believed that what mattered most was that you were safe, that you grew up without fear, without the weight of knowing how close things once came to being different. My hands tightened slightly around the paper. The words felt careful, chosen, like they had been written with a purpose I did not yet understand. You were very small, too young to remember anything clearly, and I was grateful for that. It meant you could grow without questions, without shadows. I never wanted you to look at me and see anything other than your mother. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. My eyes moved more slowly now, each line pulling me deeper into something I had spent years avoiding. Some people believe that love should be visible, something that can be seen and understood easily. But the kind of love that matters most is often quiet. It does not ask to be recognized. It only asks to exist. I lowered the paper slightly, my vision blurring for a moment before I forced myself to continue. I know you have built a life that is strong and beautiful, and I am proud of you every single day. That has always been enough for me. The letter ended there. No explanation. No details. Just those words. I stood there in the middle of the room, the paper still in my hands, feeling something unfamiliar press against the carefully constructed walls I had built around myself. It was not just confusion. It was not even guilt, not yet. It was something deeper. A realization that there was a part of her story I had never tried to understand, because I had never needed to. Or maybe because I had chosen not to. I looked down at the photograph again, then back at the letter, and for the first time, I felt something I could not push away. Not a memory, not a clear answer, but the undeniable sense that everything I thought I knew about her was incomplete, and that somewhere in the space between what I had seen and what I had ignored, the truth had been waiting all along. I did not go to work the next day, which in itself felt like a disruption I could not fully justify, but could not ignore either. I sat at my kitchen table with the letter in front of me, reading it again and again, hoping that repetition might reveal something I had missed the first time. It did not. The words remained the same, careful and incomplete, as if they were pointing towards something just beyond reach. By mid-morning, I made a decision that felt unfamiliar in its uncertainty. I picked up my phone and searched for a number I had not called in years. Mrs. Turner. The name came to me slowly at first, then with more clarity. She had been our neighbor when I was young. Someone who always seemed to know more than she said. The phone rang longer than I expected, and for a moment I thought no one would answer. Then a voice, older now but still recognizable, came through. I introduced myself, and there was a pause on the other end, followed by a quiet warmth I did not deserve. "Emily," she said, as if the name carried something heavier than just recognition. I asked if I could come by. She did not hesitate. The drive to her house felt different from any other drive I had taken in years. Not controlled, not planned, just necessary. The neighborhood had not changed much. The same tree-lined streets, the same houses with small details that made them feel lived in rather than perfect. When I pulled up, I sat for a moment, looking at the front door, trying to steady something inside me. Then I stepped out and walked up the path. Mrs. Turner opened the door before I even knocked. She looked at me for a long second, her eyes moving across my face in a way that felt both gentle and knowing. "You look just like her," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. I did not know how to respond to that, so I followed her into the living room, where everything felt warm in a way my own apartment never did. We sat across from each other, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I realized then that I did not know how to ask the question that had brought me there. So I said the only thing I could. "I found a letter," I told her. Her expression shifted slightly, not surprised, but not entirely prepared either. "And I think there is something I do not know." She nodded slowly, her hands folding in her lap. "There is a lot you do not know," she said quietly, not unkindly. The words landed heavier than I expected. I felt my throat tighten, but I forced myself to continue. "About her. About what happened." Mrs. Turner looked down. For a moment, as if choosing her words carefully, then back at me. "Your mother never wanted you to carry that," she said. She was very clear about it. I nodded, remembering the letter, the way it avoided specifics. "But I need to understand," I said, and for the first time, my voice did not sound controlled. It sounded honest. That seemed to matter. She studied me for a moment longer, then leaned back slightly, exhaling as if she had been holding something in for years. "You were very little," she began, barely old enough to speak in full sentences. I felt my hands rest more firmly against my knees, grounding myself as I listened. It was late in the evening. Quiet. The kind of night where nothing seems out of place. She paused, not for effect, but because the memory itself seemed to require space. Something went wrong in the house. Not something dramatic at first, just enough that it changed everything in a matter of moments. I did not interrupt. I could not. "Your mother did not hesitate," she continued, her voice steady but softer now. "She never thought about herself. Not for a second." My chest tightened, the words settling into places I had kept closed for years. "All she cared about was getting to you, making sure you were safe." I felt my breath catch slightly, and for a moment, I could not tell if it was from what she was saying or what I was beginning to understand. Mrs. Turner looked at me carefully, as if measuring how much I could take. "You came out of that night without a mark," she said gently. "Not a single one." The room felt very still. Too still. "Your mother did not," she added, just as quietly. And in that moment, something inside me shifted completely, not loud or sudden, but undeniable, like a truth that had always existed finally finding its way to the surface, leaving me with nowhere left to hide from it. The silence that followed her words did not feel like an absence of sound, but like something pressing inward, tightening around my chest in a way that made it difficult to breathe normally. I sat there, my hands resting motionless in my lap, staring at nothing in particular while everything inside me began to rearrange itself. In ways I could not control. Not a single mark. The sentence echoed, steady and unrelenting. I tried to picture it, to connect the fragments I had uncovered with the reality that had always been right in front of me, but something resisted. Not because it was unclear, but because it was too clear. I looked down at my hands, turning them slightly as if I might find some trace of what she had described, some physical reminder of a moment I had no memory of. There was nothing. Smooth skin. Unbroken. Untouched. I swallowed slowly, my throat tightening as I forced myself to look up again. Mrs. Turner was watching me carefully, not with pity, but with a quiet understanding that felt heavier than any sympathy could. She made sure of that, she said softly, as if she could hear the thoughts I was not able to form. I nodded, though the motion felt distant, disconnected from the rest of me. My mind drifted again, but this time the images came sharper, more insistent. Not full memories, but sensations. Warmth. Movement. A voice calling my name, urgent but steady. Arms holding me close. Protecting me. I closed my eyes briefly, pressing them shut as if I could either force the memory into clarity or push it away entirely. Neither happened. Instead, something else surfaced. Not from the past, but from the years that followed. Every time I had turned away from her. Every moment I had avoided standing too close. Every glance I had refused to hold. The way I had controlled the narrative, not just for others, but for myself. I opened my eyes again, the room around me suddenly feeling smaller, as if the walls had moved closer without warning. Why did she never tell me? I asked, my voice quieter now, stripped of the certainty it once carried. Mrs. Turner did not answer immediately. She leaned back slightly, her gaze thoughtful rather than hesitant. Because she did not want you to look at her differently, she said at last. She did not want your life to be shaped by something that was never your burden to carry. I felt something inside me break, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that left no room for denial. I thought about the letter again. The careful words. The things left unsaid. It had not been avoidance. It had been protection. Not for herself. For me. I exhaled slowly, my breath uneven now, no longer controlled or measured. I was ashamed of her, I said, the words barely audible but undeniable. Saying them out loud felt like placing something fragile and irreversible into the open air. Mrs. Turner did not react with shock or judgment. She only nodded, as if acknowledging something that had already been understood. You did not know, she said gently. But the words did not comfort me the way they were meant to, because I realized then that not knowing had been a choice. Maybe not in the beginning, but somewhere along the way, I had stopped asking, stopped looking, stopped seeing her as anything more than what I allowed myself to see. I stood up slowly, the movement deliberate, as if standing meant accepting something I could no longer avoid. I need to see her, I said, more to myself than to her. The decision settled into place immediately, not as something new, but as something that had been waiting beneath the surface all along. Mrs. Turner nodded again, her expression softening slightly. You should, she said. I walked toward the door, each step feeling heavier than it should have, not because of hesitation, but because of what I now carried with me. Not just the truth, but the weight of everything I had built on top of not knowing it. As I reached for the handle, I paused for just a moment, my hand resting against the cool metal. Then I opened the door and stepped outside, knowing that whatever waited on the other side was not something I could prepare for, only something I had to face. I did not remember the last time I drove to her house without rehearsing what I would say, but this time there were no rehearsed lines, no carefully constructed sentences waiting to protect me from discomfort. The road felt longer than it actually was, every turn familiar, yet somehow heavier, as if each mile was carrying me closer to something I had avoided for years. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I turned off the engine but did not move right away. The house looked the same. Small, modest, the porch light still, slightly dim, the paint along the railing worn in places where time had quietly settled in. Nothing about it had changed, and yet everything felt different now that I understood what I had refused to see before. I stepped out of the car slowly, my movements deliberate, as if rushing would make me miss something important. The air was still, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel louder than it should. I walked up the path, my eyes drifting briefly to the windows, wondering if she was inside, wondering if she already knew I was coming. When I reached the door, I hesitated for just a second, my hand hovering near the handle, the same way it had earlier that day. But this time, there was no turning away. I knocked. The sound felt sharper than expected, echoing slightly in the stillness. A few seconds passed. Then I heard movement inside. Slow, steady. The door opened, and there she was. Margaret stood in the doorway, wearing a simple sweater, her silver hair loosely pulled back, her posture as calm as it had always been. Her eyes met mine immediately, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. There was no surprise in her expression, no question, just that same quiet presence I had spent years avoiding. Emily, she said softly, as if my name had never been something difficult to say. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. All the words I had thought I might need disappeared the moment I saw her. Up close, the scar was exactly as it had always been. Unchanged. Honest. I realized then that it had never been something she tried to hide. It had only been something I refused to accept. I was not expecting you, she added gently, stepping slightly to the side to let me in. I nodded, though the movement felt uncertain. I know, I managed to say, my voice quieter than usual, stripped of the confidence I had relied on for so long. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of her home surrounding me, something warm and grounding that I had not noticed in years. The living room looked the same. Everything in its place. Everything cared for. She closed the door behind me, the soft click sounding louder than it should have. "Can I get you something?" she asked, her tone unchanged, as if this were any other visit, any other day. I shook my head, my eyes moving around the room before settling back on her. She stood a few feet away, giving me space without stepping back, her hands resting loosely at her sides. Waiting, not demanding, not expecting, just present. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself, but the words still would not come easily. I looked at her again, really looked this time, not just at the scar, but at everything I had overlooked. The lines in her face that spoke of time and patience. The way her shoulders carried themselves, not with weakness, but with quiet strength. The same strength someone had described the day before, a word I had dismissed until now. Strong. My chest tightened, and I felt something shift again, deeper this time, more undeniable. "I went to see Mrs. Turner," I said finally, the words coming out slower than I intended. She did not react immediately. Her expression remained calm, but I noticed the smallest pause in her breathing, a subtle change that would have been easy to miss before. "I see," she replied gently. No denial. No attempt to change the subject. Just acceptance. I nodded again, my hands now resting firmly at my sides, as if grounding myself in the moment. She told me what happened. I continued, my voice steadier now, though not stronger. Margaret held my gaze, her eyes soft, but unwavering. "Did she?" she said quietly. It was not a question. It was an acknowledgement. I swallowed, the weight of everything I had learned settling fully into place between us. For a moment, I did not know what to say next. Not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much, and none of it felt adequate. I took a step closer, closing part of the distance I had kept for so long, and for the first time, I did not look away. I stood there, just a few steps away from her, feeling the weight of every moment I had chosen distance instead of closeness, silence instead of understanding. She did not move. She did not rush to fill the space between us with words or explanations. She simply waited, the same way she always had, as if time itself had never changed anything. About how she loved me. I let out a slow breath, my chest tight in a way I could no longer control or hide. "Why did you never tell me?" I asked, my voice quieter than I had ever heard it before, stripped of certainty, stripped of defense. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes soft, not surprised by the question. "Because you did not need to know," she answered gently. There was no hesitation in her voice, no trace of regret, just truth. I shook my head slowly, the motion unsteady. "But I should have known," I said, and this time the words felt heavier, more personal. She studied me for a moment, not correcting me, not agreeing, just seeing me in a way I was only beginning to understand. "You were a child," she said quietly, "and then you grew into your own life. That is what I wanted for you." I felt something inside me give way completely, not breaking in pieces, but dissolving, removing the distance I had built so carefully over the years. I took another step closer, close enough now that I could see the fine details I had always avoided, the texture of the scar, the way it moved slightly when she spoke, the way it had never once made her hide from the world. "I said something last night," I continued, my voice trembling despite my effort to steady it. "Someone asked if you were my mother, and I said no." The words hung in the air between us, heavier than anything else I had said. I waited for a reaction, for disappointment, for something that would match the weight of what I had done. But she only looked at me, her expression unchanged, calm in a way that made it harder to breathe. "I know," she said softly. The simplicity of it struck deeper than any anger could have. "You heard me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She nodded once, slow and certain. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, the reality of it settling in fully. Not just what I had said, but that she had carried it quietly, without confronting me, without asking for anything in return. When I opened my eyes again, I felt something shift inside me, something that could no longer be ignored or pushed aside. I was ashamed of you, I said, the words raw and unfiltered now, of how you looked, of what people might think. Saying it out loud felt like stripping away every layer I had hidden behind, leaving nothing but the truth I had refused to face. She did not step back. She did not look away. I know, she said again, just as gently. There was no accusation in her voice. No judgment. Just understanding. That was what broke me. Not anger. Not disappointment. Understanding. I felt my vision blur, and for the first time in years, I did not try to control it. I am so sorry, I said, the words barely steady, but completely real. I did not understand. I did not even try to understand. She reached out then, slowly, giving me enough time to pull away if I wanted to. But I did not. Her hand rested lightly against mine, warm and familiar in a way that felt both distant and immediate at the same time. You are here now, she said softly. That is enough. I shook my head again, a small, helpless motion. It is not enough, I whispered. Not after everything. She smiled then, a small, quiet smile that carried no resentment, no hesitation. It is, she replied, because love does not keep score. The words settled into me, deeper than anything else she had said, filling a space I had not realized was empty. I looked at her again, really looked this time, not at the scar, not at the differences I had fixated on, but at the person who had stood beside me my entire life without ever asking to be seen differently. And for the first time, I understood. Not just what she had done, but who she had always been. I tightened my hand around hers slightly, not out of habit, but with intention. I was hiding from you, I said quietly. Then I paused, the realization forming fully as the words followed. But you were never hiding from me. She did not answer, but she did not need to. Because in that moment, standing there with her hand in mine, I finally saw the truth I had spent my life avoiding. I had been ashamed of the face that once stood between me and everything I could have lost, and she had never once been ashamed to carry it for me.